People in Thailand approve a referendum for a new constitution, but some say the military government is using this chance to further consolidate its position. So, is this more about grabbing power or returning to democracy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. Thailand's political history has been littered with periods of turmoil and uncertainty since the 1930s. Now, military leaders say a new constitution, the country's 20th, will pave the way for peace and stability. Thai voters have overwhelmingly approved this draft constitution, but critics argue the document will just solidify the military's hold on the government. We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, though, Al Jazeera's Wayne Hay sets up our discussion from Bangkok.
There was a particularly undemocratic lead-in to the referendum, with campaigning and criticism of the vote and the constitution itself outlawed by the government, and if found guilty, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Indeed, many people were arrested. The army had already tried unsuccessfully to introduce a new constitution after it staged a coup just over 2 years ago, but it was voted down by its own National Reform Council. So it formed a new drafting committee, handpicked the members for that drafting committee to write a new charter, and it was put to a public referendum. The military government says it's on a roadmap to democracy. It will return democracy to Thailand, and there will be a general election towards the end of next year. But exactly what sort of democracy remains to be seen. And critics of the military, critics of this process, say the military has no plans to return democracy to Thailand, and indeed it's really all about entrenching military control. It has no plans to give up that power, that political power that it enjoys. To achieve that, it wants to have the provision for an appointed Prime Minister and an unelected Senate. And in that Senate, the upper house of Parliament, 6 of those seats will be reserved for security forces. Now, what all that means is that it'll be very difficult for a weakened lower house of Parliament to pass any significant laws without the approval of the military. The army, for its part, says that after a decade of political upheaval, which has seen many rounds of violence on the streets, that something needed to change. It has to take the power away from what it calls corrupt politicians who, for years, have run this country with not enough checks and balances. Wayne Hay for Inside Story, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
Let's take a closer look now at some of the important figures in Thai politics. The military came to power after a coup in 2014. It was the 12th military takeover since 1932. 2 of them were against leaders from the Pheu Thai Party, a political group that was first led by exiled Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, then his younger sister Yingluck. Supporters of the party are mostly rural workers known as the Red Shirts. For years, they've been opposed by the People's Alliance for Democracy. The so-called Yellow Shirts are members of the urban middle class who supported the military coups in 2006 and 2014. And then there's the revered and now ailing king, who's been in power since 1946. The military has often said its actions are in his defense. We'll talk to our guests in a moment. First, though, let's go to the Deputy Government Spokesperson, Major General Verapat Dapa Tipak, who joins us now on the phone from Bangkok. And Major General, we appreciate your time very much. First, your reaction to the vote succeeding as you see it.
Well, of course, this is part of the history of Thailand. Because, prior to the referendum, there's been a lot of criticism about in the referendum, but it proves that we try to. Of course, this referendum, we have to know that it is not something that the government was required to do. It was a voluntary initiative taken by the administration as part of our people-centered approach to policy. Therefore, the official outcome of the result has proved that it is a mandate for us to move forward along the roadmap that we have stated earlier about how to lead Thailand or to move Thailand to become a fully functioning democratic country.
Major General, you say that it's a mandate, but the no side, and I would say campaign, but there wasn't really much of a campaign. The no side was basically banned from forcefully expressing their opinions. Having said that, do you feel comfortable that the voters actually were fully informed of what they were voting for?
But of course, the outcome can speak for itself. That prior to asking that question, you have to understand the situation in Thailand. That during the transition period, and of course with the atmosphere that people, prior to this situation, people in Thailand. Let me use the words that the division in Thailand is quite deep and broad. So therefore, by having people refrain from expressing opinion, that would lead to the turmoil or division in society. Is something that we request the people to do. It is not. We are not asking people, not to say anything, but ask them to refrain from create any turmoil or any statement that would instigate the turmoil in the society. That was the intention.
How will this new constitution address voter concern about corruption?
Well, of course, by asking, I believe that the Constitution Drafting Committee was drafting this constitution based on the lesson learned in the past of Thailand. Every flaw happened in the past was taken as the lesson learned, as the information. Therefore, this constitution is aiming at fixing the problem occurred in the past, and the serious problem that lead the country to the deadlock is corruption. So therefore, the major characteristic of this constitution is anti-corruption.
All right, Major General Verapat, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
And time now to bring in our guests in Bangkok, Kim McQuay, Thailand country representative for the Asia Foundation. In London, Verapat Pariyawong, Thai legal advisor and visiting scholar at SOAS University of London. And also in Bangkok, joining us on Skype, Supong Limtanakool, chairman of the Center for Strategic Studies at Bangkok University. Welcome to all of you. So we have a vote result. So my first question to each of you is your reaction to this passing. Supong, I'm going to start with you.
This referendum comes as no surprise because people in Thailand, most of the people of Thailand is very, very sick and tired of demonstration and counter-demonstration in the past. And the political stability and that leads to divisiveness and bloodshed. We have to pass through this color divisiveness in this country. I myself is colorblind and I work for my country and to the best of my ability. From what I have seen, the people have spoken. 67% of the people in the whole nationwide for this referendum is in support of this constitution, while about 37% is not in favor of it. So I think that this is not a requirement for this military government to do such a referendum, but rather a voluntary action to see what the reaction of the people is towards the government and also the new constitution.
All right, I'm going to come back to one of your points in just a moment, Supong. But first, Verapat, I'd like you to weigh in on your reaction to this draft constitution apparently passing.
My position is the same as I said on your program several times, that this particular so-called referendum violates all the basic principles of the universally accepted definition of referendum. First of all, the party that introduced this so-called referendum lacks legitimacy. Nobody asked for the military to intervene in the first place, and therefore we did not ask for this kind of so-called referendum. It also violates the general principle that there must be a clear choice for the people to decide. The Thai people today were faced with a very catch-22 situation. They don't exactly know what would happen if they reject this particular draft, so-called draft constitution. It also violates a very important principle of fair and free debate. People who were handing out leaflets, campaigning for people to reject this draft, were thrown into jails. They had to face court-martial trials. So all in all, I think it's very difficult to say that we can find any genuine democratic outcome from this so-called referendum. Having said that, I agree that the Thai people want to move forward. We never want to be in this particular place under the junta rule in the first place. So the question becomes, what can the Thai people do in the meantime to peacefully move towards election and return to civilian rule?
You raised a lot of important questions about this referendum, and I'm going to come back to that as well. But first, Kim, I'd like you to weigh in. I know that you're not going to take a position per se, but I guess my question to you is just, are you surprised by the vote?
Well, I think my reaction to Sunday's vote was, in a sense, a hybrid of the two responses you've just heard. That certainly it will be said now that the people have spoken, the results of the referendum are going to stick. But the concern that I would have would be that, for the reasons that we've heard and some of the reasons that on which you pressed the government spokesman, this is a referendum on Thailand's 20th constitution, and within that constitution are a variety of very complex elements, some of which represent a significant departure from past constitutions. And so the concern is whether or not, in this particular environment, in the lead-up, the information that was available to voters to form their opinion, particularly on the second question, but then their opinion about the Constitution more broadly, this deeply nuanced document, my concern would be that we did not have an environment in which there was access to complete information, and those that wanted to take a thoughtful, contrary view to the Constitution weren't afforded the same space as others were to put forward a lot of those issues. The Asia Foundation undertook an informal observation today. There was no formal accredited observation permitted by the Election Commission of Thailand, but we did have a chance just to meet with voters who were coming out of the polling stations and quiz them about sort of the quality of information they had. And some of them did acknowledge that it was often very difficult to understand some of the complexities of the Constitution.
Verapat, how did Thailand end up at this point, having this vote again, this happening every few years? What is the context of how this came to be?
I think that's a very important question, and it goes back to what the Major General said in the beginning. He talked about the need to fight corruption, and I agree with him. Among very few things, I agree with him that we need to fight and tackle corruption. The question becomes, how do you fight corruption when you cuts the people out from the process, when you forbid people from asking questions and criticize those in power? So I think the junta government, the military regime, needs to answer that question. And unless they can come up with a sincere answer to that question, we will end up in this endless cycles of violence and intervention by the military regime. The second point, I think, that leads to this vicious circle has to do with what the other panel speaker was talking about, the need to stop instability in the country. And I agree. If you look back 2 years ago, when we had an election, a general election back in 2014, there were protesters on the streets. The same protesters who came out today and say, let's vote for this referendum, let's accept this draft constitution. But back then, 2 years ago, they prevented the election from going ahead. The police tried to ask them to go home. The military did nothing. And the court said the police can't do anything. But when the military stepped in, the Thai court simply say, well, the military stepped in, so do whatever you want. You can throw people in jail. So I think there's an irony there. So unless we can tackle these two questions, first, the questions concerning transparency for people to participate and fight corruption, and second, the genuine legal system that can be just and fair to all sides. When there's a political protest, then we will face these endless cycles of violence and interruptions again in the future, I'm afraid.
Supong, I'd like you to weigh in on some of the points that Verapat just made.
I fully understand what Verapat has said. And I would like to ask Verapat, since he is so very pro-democracy, which I am, I want to ask him about him serving the very corrupted 2-3 governments in the past. what happened to the people who have broken the law and have corrupted this country into nearly bankruptcy? Why have Mr. Verapat done nothing at all to ask the people, the very people that he supported, that came by the democratic, quote-unquote, way of voting? To me, it seems like if you are going to have one man, one vote, I agree. Transparency and accountability must come along with it. But the court, this is a civil court and not a military court, have passed down the accusation and also the verdict that the former Prime Minister of Thailand, Mr. Thaksin Shinawatra, which Mr. Verapat has very, very high respect of Thaksin Shinawatra. To me, Thaksin Shinawatra is just a fugitive. Instead of coming back to face, the justice in the Thai civil court system, not military, why not ask him to come back under the law and the rule of law that Mr. Verapat so much admire?
Supong, you said a mouthful there, and I want Verapat to have a chance to respond, and then I want to bring Kim further into this conversation as well. So Verapat, please address what you feel comfortable talking about.
I think Mr. Supong might have not just only misunderstood my name, but the entire ideology that I put forward for the past many years. He's welcome to come to London, and I'll show him my articles and interviews, which I put forward very clear positions that Mr. Thaksin Shinawatra, as well as any politicians, must face a normal justice system. And therefore, I cannot accept military intervention. I cannot accept an ad hoc committees to prosecute politicians. I want Mr. Thaksin Shinawatra, as well as anyone, including Mr. Supong or myself, to face a same fair trial. And unless Mr. Supong can answer a very fundamental question that military intervention and court-martial is a wrong approach towards democracy, then I think he should be ashamed of himself for calling himself pro-democracy. The second point I would like to ask him is, does he agree with me that the Thai people need to go back towards democracy where there is a transparent fight against corruption, where all politicians, including military generals, need to be answering questions when people ask what happens to the funds, what happens to donations, what happens to the budget spent by those in power? If Mr. Supong agrees with me, then we are on the same page and there's no need to bring up any points of particular politicians, which is the same tactics that we've seen in this endless cycles of soap operas in Thai politics.
All right, I want to bring Kim into this conversation now. Kim, there has been a lot of talk about people's frustration with corruption, with lack of transparency. How much of a factor was that with voters choosing stability now?
Here's what I think. I'm just going to comment a little bit first on the contest between my fellow panelists, because I think what they're both saying is what they're both saying is correct, but it's indicative of the tensions that have characterized Thai politics for the last decade, and ultimately Thailand must move towards some kind of a process of political settlement that will reconcile all of these issues. The issue of corruption certainly has plagued Thai politics, and it's not been unique to any political side, but something that's been associated with all political actors in Thailand, as it has been in many countries for a long time. But my overarching concern is that with the process that we've had, and what we've had even really for the last 2 years, despite a lot of lip service being made to corruption, to fixing the Thai economy, to getting the Thailand economy back on trajectory from modest economic growth back to the economic growth of the kind that it has experienced historically, nothing that's happened over these 2 years has really helped to address these tensions that are being articulated by my panelists. And my biggest worry is that because of the controversy that will be associated with this referendum, it'll be very difficult for Thais and for political actors to move forward in a way that can genuinely address these issues because of the controversy that may be associated with the referendum and the new constitution.
Supong, so how does Thailand move forward if this does lead to some period of stability? How does Thailand move forward to have a more open, healthy democracy where there isn't such upheaval every few years? What needs to happen?
Well, I think the most important thing is for the people of Thailand to be more aware of the political situation around them. As far as I know, even at the university and the higher education level, people have very, very low awareness of what is going on around them. And probably
is that by
it's sad to say that many of them
Supong, is that by design? Is that by design on the government's part, by design for the voters not to be fully informed?
Not at all, not by design. But I think this is according to a lot of people's observation that the political awareness of the university students, also with the university professors, their awareness, as opposed to what happened 40 years, 30 years ago, we have much less political for the students and the professors in the university than what has been in the past. And I think this is very important because Constitution is very complicated. Last Constitution was 309 articles, and I was one of the 32 faculty experts. And I can, look at only a portion of the thing and try to understand it. In Thailand, I'm very sure that not more than 10 or 15 people have a very thorough understanding because Thailand Constitution, is based upon German, French, and British laws. So, a potpourri of things that they put together.
I think that viewers not being fully informed is actually an issue that many countries tackle and find a bit frustrating. Verapat, what about this new constitution concerns you the most?
The fact that it prevents the people from actually using the constitution. When you talk about a constitution as a universal concept, it's supposed to be an agreement among the people in the society. So it lacks the fundamental aspects of the universal definition of constitution. First of all, we don't exactly know who will be in charge because there are so many different organizations who will have so many says in politics of Thailand under this particular draft constitution. We don't even can know for sure who will be the prime minister, even if we vote for this one particular party. The second concern is the fact that the design of this constitution makes it very difficult for it to be amended. And this is very, very contradictory to what happened today. The generals and certain people seem to be very happy that there's a referendum today, that people have voted. But why make it so difficult for people, the same Thai people, to make a decision to revise or to change this constitution? Why put it into the hands of a very small group of judges to decide on political matters, not legal matters? And I think those are the two highlights of highly concerning issues of this particular constitution.
Kim, do you think that this will lead to a period of stability? And I understand that Verapat is saying that the Constitution kind of is set in stone, that it can't really be changed. But do you think that this is going to lead to more protests, more stability? What do you think will happen between now and these elections that are supposed to happen in 2017, these elections that have been promised?
My guess, Richelle, is that we'll have a kind of a veneer of stability for the time being. I would go back to the point that I made earlier about the Constitution and this process not really addressing these underlying issues, and so all of those remain outstanding. Now, there will be, I think we'll have a period over the next few days where the government will be very pleased with the result and will sort of announce, as we said, that the people have spoken. But over time, we may see elements of protest coming forward, but I think for many Thais, the specter of violence going back to May 2010 and sort of the closing days before the coup, when we had protests in the streets of violence, and the specter we had the Thai streets gridlocked in Bangkok, and this specter of violence, I think that really weighs on people's conscience. And so people's readiness to test things politically, I think, is pretty circumscribed right now. So in the short term, I think we will have a kind of stability, but it won't be a stability ultimately, I think, that's productive or gets at some of these outstanding issues that lie ahead for Thailand.
That will be the last word, and I'm sure that I'll be calling on you gentlemen again to see how this all plays out. So thank you very much to Kim McQuay, Verapat Pariyawong, and Supong Limtanakool. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime. Go to our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team, bye for now.